The following is an original production of AZPM News.
For AZPM, I'm Mark McLemore, and this is Arizona Spotlight. Coming up, meet three of the feature film directors of tomorrow. They're taking a big step forward this weekend at the 21st annual I Dream in Widescreen. How is it that ostriches came to play such an important part in this region's history? Historian Janelle Maloney talks about her book, Birds Gone Wild. And I'll talk to Alison Bechdel, one of the leading graphic novelists of our time. Those stories are all next on Arizona Spotlight. The film industry has recently undergone some seismic changes, many of which make it even harder for an up-and-coming director to succeed. And this is an industry where most success meant taking big gambles in the first place. The graduating class of student filmmakers from the University of Arizona School of Theater, Film, and Television are all aiming high, and an annual showcase of their short films called I Dream in Widescreen makes its debut at the Fox Tucson Theater this Saturday, May 9th. I watched three of the films from these emerging talents, and next we'll meet the directors and hear them talk about their work.
My name is Caitlin Litticoat. I am also a senior BFA in the film program, and my film is called Rebranding Bob.
It looked kind of like an episode of The Office at the beginning. So what was your inspiration for the setting of the film?
Well, I take a lot of my real life experiences, of course. I practically grew up in an office. My mom would take my sister and I after school, and we'd just practically be at her office 24/7. So a lot of the things, I visualized an office. It was very easily able to happen for me because I just thought back to basically my childhood.
I think casting was a real strong suit in all the films, but it really caught my eye in Rebranding Bob. What can you say about the experience of directing actors who, in some cases, were much older than you?
It's definitely an experience because every actor, as I've found throughout the years, they respond differently to different directions. And there was certainly a much different way I was directing the younger generation versus my lead actors who were of the older generation. The guy who plays Bob Hamilton, who is a faculty professor, his name is Kevin Black. He has been doing a lot of acting all the time. I believe he teaches acting at the U of A. I found out very early on during rehearsals he's very improvisational. He would do things a little bit differently each time. So I learned that his style was just to be a little bit different each time and just described, okay, you're doing it like this, but think about that your character has just gone through this kind of event. And he'd be able to take that note and just go flying versus I know for Sammy, my actress, she played the Gen Z intern, Ash. She responded in different ways. I'd be like, okay, can you do this, but slightly to the left? And she'd be like, oh, got it, absolutely, whatever you need. So it's just balancing the two different types of ways you go about talking to your actors, how you direct them. It's a very, very fascinating process, and I really enjoyed it, actually, because it kept me on my toes, trying to, understand, okay, where are they coming from versus where am I coming from?
There's also a little bit of a spoof of one of my favorite internet shows in your film, where you do a little tip of the hat to the Hot Ones. And I think the Hot Ones has a great gimmick for a talk show, in that when people start eating really spicy wings, it's like truth serum. All facade goes away. People can't lie while their mouth is burning like that. How did that part of the shoot go?
Oh, that was great. We actually had a very interesting day that day because originally we were supposed to shoot in a different location, but then for no reason whatsoever, that location that was supposed to be secured, they didn't tell us that the entire building's power would be off. But because I happened to have a faculty member on board, I was able to then use a space that became the Hot Ones scene. And it looked even better than the original space I had. So honestly, it worked out really well. But yeah, I just was like, we've got to include that in this. When you're rebranding, what do you think of social media? And I mean, one of the first things I thought of was the Hot Ones.
Was Professor Black actually eating spicy wings?
He was. He was a very good method actor. He was like, whatever we need to get the shot, I will put as much spice as possible. I think it went on for like 3 minutes of just straight up improv for it. And I die every single time I watch it.
Hi, my name is Sarah Strowski, and I'm one of the seniors in the BFA class of 2026. My film is called In Memory.
Why did you choose this particular story?
I have a twin brother, and growing up, we watched a lot of scary movies that we were way too young to watch. And I remember when I was around 6 years old, my grandparents played Coraline. That is not a kid's movie for that age. And I remember my brother leaving the room crying, being like, turn it off. I don't want to keep watching this. And I was like, no, I have to watch it. I have to finish this. I need to be the older, better sibling and fully sit through this. So definitely had nightmares for years. But ever since then, I've been really fascinating with horror storytelling and really into being scared in the theater. So kind of inspired this story. But just recently, my grandfather passed away, and it just made me think about like my childhood. And growing up, we slept at my grandparents' house a lot, and they live in a pretty big house. So you can imagine the long hallways. There's statues everywhere. So as kids, we were always terrified to like leave the bedroom at night. So that really helped inspire this story of being in this big house that you're familiar with, but at nighttime.
There was a real sense of place in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Your film only has 3 characters. What was important to you in the writing process in terms of establishing and showing these relationships?
A lot of it has to do with how you grieve in the process of that. And when we lost our grandfather, my brother was very to himself and quiet about it. And that kind of intrigued me because I felt like I needed to constantly talk about how I was feeling or just kind of let my family know what was going through my head. And we've never really revisited talking about it. So I think that helped the story of just being like someone's just in their own head and what that's like.
Have you been able to show this film to your brother yet?
No, he doesn't want to see it until the premiere.
My name is David J. Aberly. I'm also a senior at the BFA program, and my film is called They Wait. It's an indigenous horror film, and so it comes from a background of me being an indigenous medicine person and going through my life, interacting with different spiritual beings, different entities, and just wanting to connect to that aspect of indigenous storytelling and do it in a way that's impactful, that leaves a message with horror. I got inspired by watching The Lighthouse and then obviously Godfather, one of my favorite movies. It's like, what would happen if we kind of put them together? And so,
That's sick.
Yeah, right. And wanting to just kind of incorporate a big part of indigenous storytelling, which is leaving a lesson within what you have. And so a big lesson with my film, They Wait, is just being careful with your words.
In your bio, it says you are a tradition keeper.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's very interesting that you would put that in your bio. What do you think makes you a tradition keeper?
From the age of 13, I was selected to be part of novelist, which is translated out to being a guardian, which is a medicine person with a little bit more specific training. And so I kind of grew up in that lifestyles and just was learning songs, ceremonies, and would eventually got to a role to where now I'm a community medicine person and just someone who has specifically been trained to deal with the supernatural and the paranormal and interact with that. And so being a tradition keeper, being a knowledge keeper, a storyteller, as well as a medicine person, there comes responsibilities of maintaining the sacredness of those stories and protecting them as well. I wanted to use this avenue and space to still teach the lessons and touch into those stories without exploiting them.
You reminded me, I wrote down the first 4 words that are said in your film. You carry a shadow. I felt like that was such a great way to begin a movie of any kind, but really set the foundation for the story that would emerge.
Michael, the grandfather that comes in to ask for this deal, at what level of sanity, at what level of desperation is someone to go ask for another person's life? To get to that point of even getting into that room, you're carrying something, and people carry memories, scars, they carry things with them that's heavy, and sometimes it drives people to do the worst of things and really not be careful.
Is filmmaking, would you consider it to be a passion in your life?
100%. It is the love that I found, even just coming to U of A, switching majors to film and television. It is something that I dream, I even have nightmares sometimes about, but it is something that I want to do for the rest of my life. It brings me joy.
Caitlin?
Yes, it's a huge passion of mine. I think in anything in life, you have to be able to have a certain amount of passion towards it, or else is it really worth doing if you're not passionate? For me, filmmaking is almost my biggest passion in real life.
And Sarah?
It is also a passion of mine. I also switched my major first semester into film and television, but I also think film is like a lifestyle because I watch around like 4 movies a week. It just, everyone needs entertainment. You constantly need it with you, and you need storytellers. So I like to consider myself a storyteller, and I hope to go into film full time. So this was a 5 semester program, so I think we're all just excited to see all of our films together. We're a very close class as there's only 11 of us, and a lot of us worked on each other's sets, so I think we're all just really nervous and excited to all be there for each other and watch everyone's final projects.
Directors Caitlin Liddicoat, Sarah Ostrowski, and David J. Aberle will be joined by 8 other filmmakers, all seniors from the University of Arizona School of Theater, Film, and Television, at the 21st Annual I Dream in Widescreen. It's Saturday at the Fox Tucson Theater. Doors open at 6 p.m. You can see a trailer and find more information on the Spotlight page at azpm.org. Stay tuned. The show will be back right after this break. Welcome back to Arizona Spotlight. Proudly a native Arizonan, author Janelle Maloney is a historian with exotic taste. Her new book, Birds Gone Wild and Other Stories of Arizona Ostrich Ranching, covers that subject in depth, but it was born out of a somewhat morbid piece of her own family's history.
In 1910, just in the city of Phoenix alone, there were 5,000 ostriches. That was a ratio of 2 humans to 1 ostrich. We were literally overrun with ostriches.
Well, how is it that Arizona and ostriches made a connection in the first place? I mean, what started the ostrich boom?
What really started it, in my opinion, well, we've got the females wanting their feathers. That was really a big shift in the fashion industry back in the
I
gay
assume
90s.
it's like for women's hats.
Hats, dress trim, underwear trim, shoe adornments. It was out of control for a while. But bringing it to Arizona was a matter of professional jealousy and thinking, how can I avoid paying import taxes by sending ostrich feathers from South Africa to the United States? You see, the U.S. and Europe were the top purchasers. And so some farmers said, well, we don't want to pay all that, so let's just find an alternative place to raise ostriches, and then we won't have to pay all those extra tariffs, et cetera. So in 1882, 22 were brought to the United States, and in 1888, Arizona received our first baker's dozen.
Other than feathers, how would a prospective ostrich farmer expect to benefit from these animals?
The ostrich farmers of the day, or ostrich ranchers, we ranch livestock, we farm vegetables. But I guess if you say we're growing a feather on the bird, then we could be feather farmers. But they were excited about this industry because they were bringing in over $1 million a year for an animal that requires about 1/10 of the care to standard cattle and less than even a sheep. And so they made a huge profit on their investment.
And Arizona's climate was well suited to the birds.
More than perfect. Arizona is actually the closest comparison to the African savannas, which is their native climate, in the Western Hemisphere. So this is literally the best place in the world outside of the African savanna for an ostrich to live and thrive.
So was this sort of a get-rich-quick scheme like we hear about tulips at one time in Holland?
I wouldn't say it was quick. An ostrich chick will still take 3 or 4 years before it'll produce a single egg. But once they are around 9 months or a year, you can start clipping their feathers, and the quality just gets better and better as you breed them to that. You're going to feed them well. You're going to make sure that they're getting quality veterinary care, and you'll make longer, bigger, fluffier, thicker feathers than anywhere else. In fact, there was one rancher in Avondale, Mr. Cross, who started to crossbreed the redneck and the blue neck ostriches, and he produced feathers that made the South Africans very, very curious or jealous.
With all respect to your ancestor who sadly met their end, how did this ostrich stampede happen?
So in 1914, that very large Pan-American ostrich company in Avondale was closing. The president of the company had passed away, and they were liquidating all of their assets. And Dr. A.J. Chandler, founder of Chandler, Arizona, was purchasing 300 of those cheap birds at that point. But instead of doing what was normal, what was expected, to put them on a train car and have them delivered to the station that was about a half block away from the San Marcos Hotel, he decided to go with a publicity stunt to march these birds from Avondale to Chandler following different canal routes. So they brought them out about 5 miles. At that point, the neighborhood was no longer fenced. They left a portion that kind of like bumpers on a bowling alley. They were no longer being fenced in. And those ostriches, well, we learned they don't herd. They don't stay together. They go in any direction they feel like at any point. And they took off. They actually stampeded, and of course they scared a horse and buggy, and that's how my relative met her end. But they ended up in the deserts of Mesa. They ended up in the Rialto River. They scared a duck hunter in a river, and he thought maybe it was a duck, and he turned around and he thought, oh, that's not a duck. And so they took off, and the newspapers announced ostrich hunting, an Arizona sport. And they caught all except 70 of them that we still don't know where they ended up to this day.
Do we actually have any wild ostrich still existing in this state?
Not today, and really not back then either. Let's say you find an ostrich in your yard, and you know those feathers are worth money. Are you going to walk it back to its owner, or are you going to collect that ostrich and cash in? So things like that happened. Also, we believe the Gila and Pima people were not so picky about hunting and eating them, and they are great eating, by the way. So that did happen often.
Does that mean that you've tried ostrich or perhaps even ostrich eggs?
Ostrich is comparable to the finest sushi tuna, the finest Wagyu beef. It is very expensive, but it is soft, sweet, nutty, red meat. It is not anything like a turkey. You just need a little butter, lemon juice, salt or soy sauce, and it's perfect.
Where exactly were you served ostrich?
It is available in Arizona through the Rooster Cogburn Ostrich Ranch. And there's also a food truck that is there on the weekends, and they make ostrich burgers for the guests.
Tell us about your book and your career as an author of unique Arizona history.
Birds Gone Wild is a humorous pop history of the history of Arizona's ostrich ranching industry from boom to bust. It's slightly unhinged, and it combines weird history with weird science and lots of weird humor. I've been writing mostly about family history for about 5 years. So I love writing about my family who lives in the Southwest and their explorations and, unfortunately, in this case, their sad endings. But hey, even a sad story can be a great story.
Janelle Maloney told me that a group of ostriches is not called a flock, a herd, or even a murder. It's called a troop. Artist and writer Alison Bechdel is now an established fine artist in the field of graphic novels. But Bechdel first made her name in the late 1980s with a comic strip called Dykes to Watch Out For, which ran in various indie newspapers across the country. For the LGBTQ+ community, it was meaningful representation. For many others, including myself, it was a social icebreaker, and it helped to educate and entertain. Growing up in Texas as a straight, cisgendered white male, it was the very first queer art that I was ever exposed to, and it taught me a lot. When I began my conversation with Alison Bechdel, I let her know how an early sequence in her comic strip influenced me to be more open-minded and led me to make new friends and started me on a path to being a better person.
My goodness.
Well, I honestly feel that way. And so I don't think I would have gotten on that road had it not been for encountering some of your early work.
Mark, that's so moving. Oh, my God.
So what do you recall about that period in your career, like 1986, 87, 88? Where were you living? How were you feeling about your choice to dive in and be a cartoonist? And what comes back to you from that era?
Okay, well, first of all, that's very moving, and I'm just impressed that you were even open to reading that at that point in time. Like, that's a testament to you, you know.
I didn't have to be convinced that it was art. I already knew damn well it was art.
Right. So you were predisposed. Okay. But still. Yeah, so back at that time, that was 1987, I think, I was living in Minneapolis, which I have been thinking about a lot over the past week, as you might imagine, as this crazy ice situation is happening. Like, I lived right in that neighborhood. I lived 3 blocks from where Nicole Renee Good was shot. I lived 8 blocks from where George Floyd was killed. I know that neighborhood, and it very much informed my comic strip. It's a neighborhood, it's a very diverse neighborhood filled with progressive activists of all kinds. All my neighbors were, as many of my housemates were. You know, everything's so dystopian lately, but and I know this, by the time this interview comes out, this story is going to be, there's going to be 1,000 more worse stories probably, but I have been thinking a lot about that time, the years I spent living in South Minneapolis, which very much informed my comic strip and the development of the characters and the kind of things that they thought about and did.
Would you say that you were optimistic at the time? Were you more excited about what you were doing, or were you daunted?
I was very excited. I'm glad I didn't know where things were headed because that would have been a real bummer. But no, I felt very excited. I felt like we were already seeing all kinds of positive change based on activism that had been going on at that point for 20 years. And it felt very hopeful. Like, oh my God, people are really changing their minds. Laws are changing. One of the difficult things about what's happened since Trump got elected the first time is having to kind of revise my whole, the sense that history was progressing in a positive direction. It's clearly not.
Do you remember the first time that you began to realize that you actually had fans?
I do, and it was pretty early on when I first started publishing my cartoons in a little feminist paper in Manhattan. And I got like a letter to the editor from someone saying how much they liked my cartoons, and I was like totally hooked. Like, oh my God, somebody saw this and liked it, and that was enough to just keep me going for the next several decades. When I was living in Minneapolis at the time we're talking about, I had a part-time job, and I was making the rest of my living from my comics, and I was very eager to make myself into a full-time cartoonist, and it took a few more years, but by the time I turned 30, I was able to do that. And I was still living in the Twin Cities then.
I'd like to know, Alison, do you often push yourself to improve your art in a certain direction? Or has your style evolved more naturally as a cohesive whole? I don't know, you tell me.
Well, I'm always trying to get better, and I feel like I've been lucky enough to be not a person who didn't start out with a strong drawing capability, but I've been able to improve it over the years, on the page, as I'm publishing. I'm just trying to get better. I don't think of myself as having different styles the way some cartoonists can draw in any number of different styles, and I cannot. I've just sort of cobbled together a set of skills, and I feel like I'm constantly getting a little better. I was just drawing my comic strip, Dykes to Watch Out For, this 8 to 10 panel strip that would come out every 2 weeks, and over the years, my drawings got smaller and smaller as I was trying to fit more story into that little space. And once I compared my word count from the early days to 15 years later, and my word count had doubled. So I was starting to work. It looked like kind of microscopic, the stuff I was doing, and I realized I was kind of outgrowing that format. And that's when I shifted my focus over to doing full-length books.
Alison, how do you guide yourself between creating a narrative that you find pleasing and the sometimes fragmentary or even false ways that memories present themselves?
Well, I am someone who has always kept pretty obsessive track of their own life. I've kept a diary since I was 10. I have a pretty good memory, or I have a good memory from my early life. It's starting to fade a bit for anything later than that. But one of the things I love about memoir is that challenge of finding a story in all of the random events, finding that signal in the noise. And of course, there isn't a story. It's all just random. But I like finding a story that feels like I'm not just imposing it, but I'm finding it in that material. I like seeing how, I don't know, almost like you would interpret a dream or something, finding themes and meaning in all of this random material of our life. That's what I like to do.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of really interesting dream work in Are You My Mother? And the sequence that I just read earlier was about when you would pretend that you couldn't walk as a child, and you and your mother would play this game, and you have a note that says, I don't really remember what we said. All this dialogue is made up. And so whenever I run across a note like that from you in the work, I always feel like you're watching out for the reader and not letting us accept everything as the gospel in relation to your life. And
God, I hate memoirs where people present these conversations from 60 years ago as if they had a tape recorder running. There's no way you can remember that. I'm making it up, so I want you to know that.
Alison Bechdel is one of the featured authors at the 4th Annual Santa Fe International Literary Festival, happening May 15th through the 17th in Santa Fe, New Mexico. We have a link for more information on the Spotlight page at azpm.org. Thank you for listening to Arizona Spotlight. This show is a production of AZPM and is posted weekly at azpm.org. The production engineer is Jim Blackwood. Production assistance by Sarah Ariano. I'm producer and host Mark McLemore.
This has been an original production of AZPM News.